I genuinely wonder if you can beat me when it comes to mosquito bites this morning. 4 so far overnight. That was just in one night. Of course, the weather is warming up again for this weekend. I'm not complaining so much about that. But the mosquito bites, yes. It's not been a lot of fun, I have to admit. But can you beat 4 on the same arm, I have to say? 4 on the same arm, and they are nasty. A little bit itchy. Nothing else is all I can say. You hear that voice, that sympathetic voice? It belongs to Rabiha Hannan.
Hello.
One of my newspaper reviewers this morning. Morning to you.
Morning.
And Mathew Hulbert. Morning to you, Matthew.
Hi, can I just say I can't cope with very, very small flying things. I can't.
You can't.
I really can't.
Oh, no.
They're horrible.
Dare I ask what you do?
Well, I just try and shoo them away, and if they don't shoo, they get the spray. You know?
Yeah. See, it was hilarious last night in our bedroom. Actually, we've got some work going on in the house at the moment, right?
Which is stressful enough.
It's stressful in the bathroom. Then we've got the hallway being done and everything else. So the guys that are doing the work have got windows open, the doors are wide open through the day, and of course we live near a park, and obviously what happens is all the flying insects get in. And last night, the amount of mosquitoes we had in the house was ridiculous.
No.
And it was warm yesterday as well.
Now, can I ask you, are the builders having lots of cups of tea?
Do you know what? Can I just say, if they are, I think they're coming in a bit later this morning, so they're probably not listening. They don't, actually.
Oh, good.
They're really good. I have to.
I
know
that's a stereotype, and sorry about that, but
I actually have to offer them and say, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And they'll be like, "No, we're all right, thanks."
Oh,
are there any attractive ones? I mean, no, but
we weren't going to go there this morning.
No, I know. I have. So.
One of them is married. I don't know the status of the other one. Is all I can say. I have no idea of the status of the other one.
Check the marital status of your builders.
Maybe if my husband's listening, which he probably is, because he's having to get out of bed early. You can find out, love, and let me know.
That'd be lovely.
Is that all right? Well, Matthew is interested, looking.
Indeed.
Look, can we just catch up with what you've been up to, Matthew?
Well, so obviously Leicester Pride recently was absolutely phenomenal. Just always my favourite day of the whole year. Just love the fact that there were so many people around, so much colour. Just a fantastic day. But as I do always say, I'm going to talk about some LGBT stuff in the paper shortly, but as I do always say, Pride is a party, but it is also a protest because we're not there yet. And so that's a thing to remember. But I normally have a couple of little drinkies at Pride, but I didn't this year, and Radio Leicester is to blame because
okay.
I was, and of course it was a joy, but I was here the following morning very early talking about Pride, and I thought, Matthew, you've got to be good. Because if you miss your alarm...
you've got to be awake.
You know, Joe Boscott would not be happy. So I had no drinkies at all at Pride.
That's an experience then.
Aren't you proud of me for that?
I am extremely proud of you. Yeah, we're excited. So you can't say we're to blame. I think that's actually we're being responsible, aren't we?
I mean, I would only have a couple. I know.
We must explain that you are also the chair of the LGBT centre here in Leicester, aren't you?
On Wellington Street. So, still doing good work for all of our communities. But, so it's fantastic to be there. And our little marquee there with all the information and everything was just busy the whole time. So our staff team did a brilliant job. So,
Rabiha, just remind us of, how you would like to be known on this programme.
Oh, I don't know. How would I like to do it? Rabiha Hannan, doing a PhD at the moment in gender equality. That's always nice to mention. But co-founder of an organisation called New Horizons in British Islam, which is all about looking at issues around identity and integration and sort of covering issues around reform and contextualisation of what the faith is and what it needs to look like in the modern world.
And I was going to say a TEDx speaker.
Oh, crikey. Oh, my goodness.
No, we were trying to catch up with you last week because it all happened. Exactly. You were still on stage, apparently.
Okay.
So, look, explain. You were invited to talk on the TEDx Leicester platform.
Yes.
The theme was fast forward.
Yeah.
What was your top? What did you talk about?
I was looking at a passion in my life at the moment, which is the ideas around sort of reform and recognising that if a religion wants to be vibrant and relatable and proactive in today's society, then it constantly needs questioning, critical thinking and reasoning to be able to move with the times, and actually how that is very much compatible with a religion that wants to deal with real people, and how we've forgotten about that as a part of, so for me as a Muslim, that there's a really important idea of renewal and reform in Islamic history that we've forgotten about, and it's going back to those roots, back to that sort of tradition, to say, well, actually, for it to be alive and meaningful today, then we need to constantly reevaluate what religion looks like in today's context. So lovely and controversial.
Wow.
I'm still well gelled, by the way. As people may remember from a few months ago when we were both on, one of my life's ambitions is to do a TED Talk. So I'm well gelled, but in the nicest sense.
It was amazing. And the thing is, I didn't, because I've done public speaking before, but I wasn't expecting the pressure that this brought with it. And it's the name and it's the brand, really. But more than anything, it was my 14-year-old who turned around and sort of said to me, "Oh my goodness, Mum, it's a TEDx talk. This is massive."
Because it's cool, isn't it?
Because it's cool. It's what they're all watching, and that put the pressure on no end.
If you've never seen a TED Talk before,
what are you doing with your life?
It's a real thing. It's a huge phenomena. You can go onto YouTube. There's even a TEDx app.
You can spend hours.
You can listen to people who know what they're talking about in their field talk about some amazing, fantastic, wide-ranging topics, from science, technology, or you name it. Body, I've the amount of stuff I've watched on there has just been incredible.
Yeah. And I think that's the pressure as well, because people go on, they listen to these impeccable speakers, really articulate, really confident, and then you've got me.
You were fabulous.
And you've got a specific time, haven't you?
So it's. I aimed for about 15 minutes. I probably did it for about 16. I think the maximum is something like 18, 19 minutes, and you've got to do it within that time. But the big thing is, it's quite a difficult topic. It's quite and Siddy, who's the sort of coordinator, the organizer, wanted it to be sort of intellectually based. So you're dealing with quite difficult topics, but this is to a mainstream audience. So it's how to relay that topic in a way that does it justice to people that may not be interested, and keeping it interesting.
How much practice did you have to do?
Quite a lot.
Because you're not allowed to take paper. You're not allowed to take a piece of paper on stage.
I took my script in with me just as a sort of something that I could rely upon, because I thought, what if I go blank and I can't?
Or if your mind just wanders.
Absolutely. But I'd memorised, I'd say, 80% of it, and tried to deliver it as best as I could.
And could you gauge audience reaction?
Yeah, I think you can. I think you can. Yeah, it was nice because actually most of it you can't really see the audience, but there is something about that atmosphere and recognise, because I talk quite fast, as you know, so recognising that actually there's something in the pauses and the silences and pacing and allowing the audience to move with you, and you do feel the spirit of that. And
this will be online.
So in a few weeks, we've been told it's going to be online, and for it to get anywhere at all, I need lots of views and likes and what have you. So please do promote.
Look, lots of stuff in the papers that you've got to talk about. There's one thing that I want to ask you if you're listening to the programme. One of the newspaper reviewers in the studio is a parent, so I'm going to be asking her opinion on this. What sort of advice you would offer students who are heading off to university for the first time, please? If you are a parent who is perhaps, just going through that, because thousands of students going off to university, if it's their first time, what sort of advice would you offer them? I would love to hear from you this morning on 0808 100 1049. What are the main considerations you think they should take on board? If you've been there yourself, clearly you may have been a university student. What are the kind of things that you should have been thinking about or wish you would have known before you got to uni? 0808 100 1049, and I'll explain why I want to talk about it with you.
We go together.
Definitely a day then, I reckon, to get the laundry sorted. Get it out there. It'll be dry within hopefully a few hours over this weekend. Get the lawn sorted. The other half wants to get, do some gardening. And I said, no, look, we've got stuff to do in the house. Let's not. But then actually probably getting out of the house at the moment is probably the best because we can't move.
With your builders?
With the builders around, yeah.
Who may or may not be hunky builders, we don't know.
I'm saying nothing.
We're waiting for an update on that.
Yeah, she's finding out for you. Don't worry, she'll get there.
My newspaper reviewers this morning on BBC Radio Leicester. I've forgotten who you are. It's Mathew Hulbert and Rabiha Hannan. You've just thrown me there, you see. I was expecting a text from my husband to say, no, I'm not going there. Anyway, look, what were we talking about? Being a student. That's what I wanted to talk to you about briefly.
Yes.
Advice when it comes to, students heading off to university. Because I would imagine, having never been to uni myself, it's quite daunting.
Yeah.
It can be. I mean, it depends how you are as a person. But I remember, I was just saying then that I was very much a home bird, still am to a certain extent. So the thought of going off to uni really was quite frightening. But once I settled down, I was fine. But I think my advice would be to just be aware of, you can get pulled into, and we're both just discussing this, but you can get pulled into lots of different groups at uni, groups of people, and sometimes they're good for you and sometimes they're not good for you. So, just be aware of influences. Yeah, is what I'd say.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm in that position at the moment, Rupal, where my daughter, the first, is about to fly the nest. And we've been shopping and we've been trying to get into that whole spirit. It's really interesting because for the last 5 years, she's been threatening us, saying, just wait till I get to that point. I'm going to move to the furthest university. And then over the last year, I think it suddenly dawned on her that I don't really want to be too far away from the family.
Right.
So
Where's she going?
She's going to Birmingham, University of Birmingham.
Lovely.
So it's not too far. It's good balance. So she'll be living away, getting her independence, but still able to come home and
One of my nephews went there. Fantastic. Had a great time.
It's a really lovely university.
Fantastic.
But yeah, no. So she's actually asked us this question. We sat at the dining table and she was sort of saying, "Well, what advice do you have?" And for me, I think it was just this idea that relates a little bit to what you said, Mathew, about just remember don't forget who you are.
Absolutely.
Use this as an opportunity to really find yourself, and don't get pulled into different crowds of people that you think are with it or really in at the time, and lose sight of who you really are. Use it as a chance to sort of explore your personality, who you want to be, how you want to contribute to the world. And
good bit of advice. What about you? What advice did you get, Rabia, when you were going to uni?
What, from our parents? I don't know. I think it was just the whole
No, I can't remember.
sort of. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we got advice as such, but I think it was the whole apprehension of just sort of, as you say, going away from home and just being responsible, I suppose, and just sort of thinking that this is the first time you're left to your own devices. You're the adult now, and just think carefully about your actions and your behaviour, because it has consequences. And I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
And budgeting and all the rest of that. And I suddenly discovered, oh my goodness, yes, I've had got this grant, but first year, I think I was one of the first years of fees, incidentally.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I went in 1999, and I think it was around Labour had just. So it was the first years of fees, and but obviously had a grant too, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, because coming from a working class background, folks with not much money, and always kind of being aware of that, suddenly thought, oh my goodness, there's quite a large amount now in my bank, but that's got to last me until whatever time, and just being kind of frit, to use a good Leicester term, of running out of money or whatever. So I mean, I had to grow up quite quickly, I think.
And I think that's been the big shock for her as well, this sudden realisation that, look, I've got this very limited budget that isn't even mine, it's a loan, and how do I use it? And she's become much more mindful of what she spends, how she uses it.
Be interesting to hear from you as well, whether you went to university yourself. What advice would you give to new students heading off? We're going to be talking about this in a bit more detail after 10 o'clock today, hopefully some top tips for if you are a new student, you're listening to the programme right now, you've been there, let me know. What sort of advice would you give to those students that are heading off to university for the first time, maybe feeling a little bit nervous, maybe a little bit apprehensive? What advice would you give them? Budgeting, perhaps, to do with money? Or what about food? I hear food is always a big thing. Laundry is another. I don't know. Lots of advice. Would love to hear from you on the programme this morning. 0808 100 1049. Share your experience with me and share your knowledge and advice with me on the show this morning.
Rupal Rajani.
Morning to you if you're just tuning in, 9:31. Thank you for staying with me this morning, and I'm with you through till 1 o'clock this afternoon. I've got to say good morning to Andrew Boland as well. Andrew, who is listening to the programme, and says, good to hear my old boss joining in the conversation at BBC Leicester. Mathew, this is someone you know.
Yes, so Andrew used to be one of our fantastic members of staff at the LGBT Centre, and so as chair of the centre, I suppose strictly speaking, I was his boss, but Andrew is a phenomenal guy now, doing great work elsewhere. But really good to have you listening in, Andrew. So,
thanks for tuning in, Andrew, and don't make it just as a one-off. It'd be nice to have your company on a regular basis. Lee as well, thank you for getting in touch. This is something that I was obviously fast asleep, but he says my dad has managed to get some pictures of strange lights over the city last night. Looking at tweets, it seems that there were a local flying display team that used pyros on their wings. It looked very cool, and you've sent some pictures. It does look a bit like UFOs or something. Unidentified flying objects last night of the full moon. By the way,
yes, of course. Friday the 13th.
It was
full
moon.
Oh my goodness.
Robbie, you picked a story out of the papers. What have you got for us?
I don't think we can start without mentioning Ben Hollis, 19-year-old from Thurcaston, who travelled 12,000 miles through 30 countries to raise money for good causes, and also see his family in Australia. And Ben, Ben is just the most adorable young man. I know him and his family through my daughter's basketball, because his sister used to play basketball, and that's how we met. And even, I think, at the age of 14, 15, you have a conversation with this guy, and he was just so bright, so socially aware, and this sort of sense of responsibility to society was just very much there right from the outset. But he's been on this incredible journey, which took him initially across Europe, and then across the Alps, through the Balkans, down to Turkey, and then he took a flight over to Syria, Iran, India, so travelled through Asia, Nepal, Vietnam and Indonesia. And it was just absolutely incredible. He's 19, that's the same age as my oldest daughter. And just to have the guts to do that. But, I was reading just this morning a quote which said that if you want to get rid of racism, then you need to travel. You need to understand the world. And he describes how in this journey he comes across all sorts of different types of people and cultures. And he's got a quote here which says, once I got deeper into Asia, you learn that as humans, we're all one and the same, and the biggest risk you really face is not asking for help. He's raised £3,700 on his way for charities like Female Education, Standing Against Racism, and Inequality and Cool Earth. So this guy is just so incredible.
He's actually off to uni very, very soon.
And he is. He's just so brilliantly intelligent. University College, London.
Great.
Yeah,
did incredibly well
Prime
with
Minister,
A-levels.
do we think?
I think we should. We start campaigning now. Watch out, Ben.
I know his mum well. Joe, of course. And you've been hearing about his journey here on BBC Radio Leicester. He is an amazing young man.
Well done, Ben.
So well done for that. Another story coming up for you, Mathew, from Mathew. In fact, after this. It's amazing how close you can get to people by meeting them once a month in a studio environment, and things you get talking about both on air but also off air. In the studio with me, Rabiha Hannan and Mathew Hulbert. I've got to share this with you. It's just, it's that time of the day, and I've had 2-3 cups of tea and I need a wee. I was just saying, have I got time to go to the loo?
Can I just say, Tim Parker makes great coffees.
Tim Parker makes great coffee?
Absolutely.
Is he? I was hoping that he might kind of jump up and have a look.
That's my endorsement.
Is it?
Yeah.
Tim Parker makes great coffee. Not that I've ever had a coffee. He did actually make me a cup of tea. Anyway, look, Rabia, Mathew, looking at the papers this morning. Mathew, your turn. What have you got?
So a couple of LGBT stories, as you might expect from me. So from the Times today, in quotes, shameful protests against LGBT lessons start again. So this is the school in Birmingham where there's been these protests. They haven't happened during the summer holidays. Sad to say that they're happening again outside the school.
Explain what the protests were about.
So these are protests by people who, for whatever reason, and I mean it's beyond me to fathom it, don't agree that children should be taught inclusively about relationships, age appropriately. This is absolutely age appropriately. So they're basically taught, the extent of it is that they're taught that some children have two mummies and some children have two daddies. Well, I mean, it's beyond me about what the protest is in regards to children being taught that. But there are these protests taking place. It has to be said, it's been alleged that a lot of the protesters actually don't have children at that school, so you wonder quite why they're... it's about more than just, actually that school and the children in that school. But they're taking place again, and I have to commend the head teacher, Sarah Hewitt-Clarkson. I mean, the pressure that this lady and indeed the whole staff there must have been under and remain under, just because they're trying to teach children in an inclusive way, aligning themselves with what the government says should happen at all schools. Given the fact that today, it isn't just about... a man and a woman and 2.4 children. Families come in many shapes and sizes, as of course they always have. But we now have these protests going on. And, as someone obviously chairs an LGBT charity here in Leicester, the impact that even at that young age, that because there will be, and they might not know it yet, but by sheer force of numbers, there'll be LGBT children in those classes. And they have to go through these protests every day. And that will have an impact. And I just think it's such a shame,
No, it's ridiculous.
Beyond me,
it's
to be honest.
Really, it's just heartbreaking, isn't it, in this day and age? And I think, there's two things that have come up. So this is basically around the change in legislation, which has now made it compulsory for relationship and sex education to be taught in schools. Absolutely. For primary school children. Incredibly important in this day and age for young people to be respectful and mindful of people in different relationships, but just be aware of the fact that there are mechanisms out there now, the internet and ways that people are learning about sex and sexuality that they need to safeguard themselves from. There's dangers out there that may not have existed 20 years ago that our young people need to be aware of, and part of what is being taught here is that whole safeguarding element of who you are, what your body is, that it belongs to you, that no one else has a right to it. So there's a whole complicated array of ideas that are being taught in a really sensitive way by teachers that are trained to teach these subjects. And then you have people out there within communities that have really hijacked the conversation and taken it off in a direction that really doesn't do any sense of service to anyone. In this particular regard, I think it's a part of, the Muslim community in Birmingham that have been very vocally against it, which doesn't make sense at all, because actually Islam teaches about respect for others and different, understanding of different communities, but also the importance of actually recognising more about sexuality and human beings. And there's something about the age appropriateness, which I think schools have taken on with a great deal of responsibility. Absolutely. Anyway. But go on.
So I was going to say, and forgive my ignorance here, Robbie, but it's like, and I'm not saying it's the only religion, but it is one of a religion that perhaps doesn't recognise the gay community and relationships like that.
So I think there's several things at play here. One is the idea of whether you have a theological difference. So even within Islam, there are Muslims that have different theological understandings of what how the LGBT community is related and understanding homosexuality. And so within that, they will have arguments amongst themselves about whether it's acceptable or not. But even if theologically you feel that it is against your faith, and as you say, there's several faiths that may feel quite strongly about this, then should you still have the position where you can impose your beliefs on other people?
Right.
Is it fair for you to say, well, actually, you want rights of your own, but you want to take the rights of other minority groups away from them? I just think that sense of hypocrisy just doesn't fit in. But the other thing I wanted to highlight was the fact that, we've got pretty large community, Muslim community in Leicester, and how their approach has been so different to this. I'm currently on a working party in a primary school in Leicester. The head teacher's been absolutely brilliant. So from day one, he's basically spoken to the parents about what's happening. He's put together a working party of mostly parents of children at the school, but also some key community members, so that we can have a really healthy, wholesome discussion about what's happening. So partly this is fear from parents who are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm a parent. I know you don't want your child to grow up before they're ready to grow up, and you know what your child is about and how they think and look at the world. So there is a genuine fear there. But if you can take people and allow them to understand, actually, this is much bigger. This has become much bigger than it needs to be. This is much more about relationships than anything sinister or trying to corrupt your child or convert them or promote certain ideas. Then people can have a sensible conversation about it.
And you can't, by teaching about this, make someone gay. Right. So let's just clear that myth up. I knew from, I wouldn't have known what to record it then, but I think I knew from probably 7, 8, 9, something like that. Definitely by the time I was 15, I was absolutely certain. So that wasn't anything that was taught to me. It wasn't. They discovered recently that there's no gay gene. It's nothing like that. It just happens. Some people are straight. Some people are gay. And it's as simple as that. And it just really makes me just so sad, and it breaks my heart, to be honest, that this is happening outside schools. And I believe also it's happened outside schools in Nottingham, so here in the East Midlands as well. I really hope it doesn't happen here in Leicester. And I think I always think of, we have our problems here in Leicester, but I always think of Leicester as a little bit of a shining light up on a hill. I think that yes, there's always going to be issues and there's always going to be people with views, but actually in Leicester we get along with each other and all of our different cultures better than probably anywhere else in the country, and I think that's a real plus for
Mathew,
us.
Let's talk about the second story, because it kind of relates to, it's an LGBT community story.
Absolutely.
Tell us about this one.
So Sam Smith. So we all know Sam Smith, don't we? Wonderful singer-songwriter. Their pronouns, and I'll explain that in a moment, were formerly he, him. But they have now come out as non-binary. And so their pronouns are they, them. And what this means is that this individual, Sam, has decided that they don't feel male or female. And this isn't about genitalia. This is about what people feel about themselves. And so Sam Smith is saying that their gender is now non-binary. Now, this will be a new concept to lots of folks, maybe lots of folks listening to this programme, but all it is about, and I say this about LGBT, and it's the same with other issues and minorities as well, just respect what people say about themselves.
Yeah.
When people say to you, I'm non-binary, just respect that. Now, as Sam says in the quotes here that are quoted in the Daily Mail today, they will accept that sometimes people will get the pronouns wrong, and as long as they've not done that maliciously, they will have no problem with that. But it's about recognising that this is an individual who feels that they don't really fit into either traditional gender stereotype or camp, and so they are now non-binary, and that's how they will lead their lives. And I just think people have to, instead of, I think the instinctive reaction of some people when they hear anything that they don't quite understand, I don't want to hear this, I don't want to know about it, it's wrong, I don't want to know. Instead of that, just take a step back and say, this is just a human being, and this is what they're saying about themselves. But
it's really interesting, I've been following sort of some of the tweets from last night when I went to bed, and I completely, utterly respect it. I just can't get my head around how to address somebody who, classes themselves as non-binary. And, because, Rabia, we are so used to saying he or she. Yeah. It's just about the language and actually getting used to
change. Human beings aren't always brilliant with change. So when something new comes about and we don't get it, our automatic instinct is to sort of stick with what we're used to. And I think, as you say, Matthew, I think it's just the idea of respecting the fact that people know who they are. Absolutely. And you should respect who they are and try. But what I found fascinating about this was just the whole idea of how language works. And we are quite restricted in the English language with just the options of 3 pronouns here, so it's either he, she, how was the other one? What is the other 2? They or I, isn't it? So how you sort of, but there are languages that have no grammatical gender, Turkish, Kurdish, Mongolian, and so you wouldn't necessarily get into this sort of thing. You don't have to, label people when you talk to them, and that's really quite a liberating experience.
And that's the new thing as well. I mean, a lot of young people that access the LGBT centre would consider themselves gender fluid. So that is, they might wake up one day and think, actually, today this is how I feel. This is the gender I'm going to be, and the next day differently. Now, again, this will take a lot for some people to process, but I think we've just got to understand that people don't. You see, it's even difficult for me to process to a certain extent because I'm a gay man and I hold those labels to myself, but I've also got to understand that other people don't feel that way. They don't want to be pigeonholed. They don't want to be boxed in. They want to be whatever they feel like on that day. And I think it'll lead to a situation where we don't have, for example, male and female toilets. And in fact, my view is that we shouldn't. There should just be...
We could continue this conversation. I know we could, because there's a lot more to talk about on this subject, and it is a fascinating one. We're going to have to take a break for a bit of music, though, in the meantime. It's 5 to 10 on BBC Radio Leicester. I'll tell you what, this conversation could continue about language, about how to address somebody, and in this case Sam Smith we were talking about as someone who is classes themselves as non-binary, and this whole conversation about he, she or they. In this case, message from Andy who says, really interesting topic this morning. Listen, if you've got an opinion, feel free to let me know. You can always text me 81333. Start your text with the word Leicester. We've only got a couple of more minutes, and I get, it's one of those conversations we could have continued,
absolutely,
and should continue,
really
perhaps on another occasion. Absolutely. A couple of really light stories from you both.
Well, the one where the disappointed father found a single What's-It in his packet of crisps quite intrigued me.
One single crisp?
So basically,
cheesy crisp.
He knew it was light bag when he took it to work, but wasn't quite sure,
expecting
just a bag. Was
crisp.
Expecting a bag of crisps, but he opens it and there's only one tiny little What's-It in it.
You'd be disappointed.
I would be gutted by that.
But I have been in a position where I've opened a Kit Kat. I'm not going to say Kit Kat, but
chocolate bar. Others are available.
I have to sort of say. But as I opened, there was no wafer in it.
So it was just pure chocolate?
It was just pure chocolate.
Outrageous.
Not good enough.
Not good enough. Matthew, one last one from you very quickly.
Well, I love my Prosecco, right, so maybe it's me.
Other drinks are available.
I'm sure you mentioned Prosecco last time.
I know, I'm obsessed. Men and Prosecco, right, okay. So, headline in the Daily Star, plebs have cheapened Prosecco. That's the Daily Star's headline. Snooty wine makers have ditched the name Prosecco, claiming the brand is now associated with cheap fizz. Ooh. Well, it may be cheap fizz, dear, but I love it. So, yes.
Look, and I love you both. Thank you so much.
And we love you, Rupal.
Thank you so much for joining me on the programme, Matthew and Rabia, here on BBC Radio Leicester. One final comment from Lee on the topic we were talking about a few minutes ago. It says only one label that we all need, and that's human. Thank you so much. Do not go away, because I want to talk to you about offering students advice as they head off to university.